Nyanji Chimbo, Soldan Himi, Zon, Monum Chimbo, Bakar Targam, Santo Sherman, Dostombat, Chichanla, Kishan, Sar. Today we will begin discussing the Analects. Why are we talking about the Analects? This time I am approaching it with a mindset of learning it myself. I'm sharing from the perspective of a student. I'm not a professor, nor am I here to teach everyone as an authority on any subject. This is because I have neither a formal lineage nor a specific teacher who has guided me. Therefore, this kind of sharing, which is entirely self-taught and based on my personal experiences, is what I aim to present. So this is certainly not definitive. There are many experts and scholars who lecture on the Analects, including some renowned masters of Chinese studies and other dedicated educators in the field. They have always been very knowledgeable and highly accomplished individuals, consistently demonstrating their expertise and skill. They have been researching this for a long time. I do not have such expertise. Moreover, I am not an expert in Chinese studies either, nor am I an expert in history. Although some of the profound teachings in the Analects, when explained in terms of religious doctrine, I feel that these are actually quite fitting, but after all, it truly belongs to the realm of Confucianism. So some Buddhists may not truly know whether they can actually accept it or not. And some other scholars may not necessarily accept it either. But it's perfectly fine if they ultimately do not accept it. We are just learning for ourselves after all. If we feel that some parts make sense, we can accept them. If they do not make complete sense, we can also simply discard them. This is because from the profound perspective of studying Buddhism and spiritual practice, if something is truly related to the noble path of liberation and is genuinely meaningful in terms of how we conduct ourselves and interact with others in our daily lives, then it is actually acceptable as well. There is a line in the Ratnagotra Vibhaga, which is the treatise on Buddha nature, that says, "Whatever leads to liberation, cherish it as a Buddha's scripture," which truly means if a certain profound theory is genuinely related to the sacred path of spiritual liberation, and if it can be clearly and meaningfully connected to this transformative journey, then it can be deeply revered just like a precious Buddhist scripture and can be respectfully and wholeheartedly accepted. Therefore, I think that many of the principles here, from the perspective of Buddhist studies, are actually also found in many Buddhist teachings. For instance, how to conduct oneself, how to handle matters, including knowing the proper measure of dealing with many things in daily life. And also, something like the truths of life, wisdom, and so on. In many of these aspects, there are a lot of similarities. So this time then, we will use this particular approach to make a comprehensive comparison and to share and to learn together with everyone in a collaborative environment. With this particular kind of respectful attitude and scholarly approach, first of all, I would really like to take some time to briefly explain and thoroughly discuss the important historical background and cultural context of the Analects of Confucius. As we all know very well indeed, this particular history is actually extremely ancient and really goes back very far, going back to the earliest times, like the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, then Yao, Shan, and Yu, and after that the Jia, Shang, Zhou, and Qin dynasties. For example, the Jia dynasty lasted more than 470 years. The Shang dynasty lasted about 600 years. After that then came the Zhou dynasty. The Zhou dynasty lasted for a considerable period of approximately 800 years. Within the extensive span of the Zhou dynasty, there were distinctly recognized periods, the Western Zhou and the Eastern Zhou. The Eastern Zhou period is further subdivided into 2 significant eras, Spring-Autumn and Warring States. Confucius happened to live and teach during the Spring-Autumn period. The Spring and Autumn period lasted for more than 400 years in total. It was during this period in ancient Chinese history that the revered philosopher Confucius was born. As for Confucius's remarkable lifetime, he lived from the year 551 BC to 479 BC. This means he lived to be approximately 72 years old. He was a prominent figure of this era, a truly great and influential founder of Confucian thought, and also a truly remarkable and exceptional person. In fact, when it comes to the profound teachings of Confucius in some of our ancient Tibetan Buddhist teachings, as I mentioned before when I was teaching the standards for being a good student and child, Dizigui, including within Tibetan Buddhism, there are some wealth-attracting rituals, some traditional fortune-telling and various divination practices, and certain ancient teachings related to the profound I Ching, the Venerable Book of Changes, as well as some other worldly and spiritual teachings about making respectful offerings to the benevolent earth deities. It is said that these were passed down by Confucius. In some ancient and profound Tibetan teachings, there are also such detailed and significant accounts. Therefore, some highly respected and venerable senior masters have a particular and deep regard for Confucius, calling him Gongse Chiki Gyalpo. Many of us widely believe that Gongse specifically refers to the revered ancient Chinese philosopher Confucius. And Chiki Gyalpo means a magical king, someone truly extraordinary. Some say he is a manifestation of Manjushri Bodhisattva, while others say he is an incarnation of Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva. Generally, the ancient great masters held different and often varied views on this subject. In any case, the influential philosopher Confucius appeared during that specific historical era, which was the spring and autumn period. Speaking of the spring and autumn period, from the perspective of the entire era, it was indeed a time of constant warfare and chaos. It should be clearly stated that he emerged during a time of significant and widespread turmoil. The entire historical era was not particularly ideal, marked by considerable challenges. However, if we carefully examine the world as a whole throughout that specific period, people often refer to it as the significant rise of civilization or as the profoundly impactful Axial Age of civilization. It should be stated that this period was indeed a truly golden age for both Eastern and Western cultures, representing a particularly flourishing and remarkably prosperous era. Why do we say this? Because when Confucius was approximately 8 years old, a period in his early life, according to our current understanding and the historical records available to us today, which provide a framework for comprehending his early existence, World Fellowship of Buddhists, and some, according to the Buddhist calendar of Southern Buddhism, Shakyamuni Buddha, the Enlightened One, is widely said to have peacefully entered Nirvana in the year 543 BCE. This significant event is the basis for our current Buddhist calendar, which I also previously referenced just a couple of days ago as well, indeed. According to the Buddhist calendar, this current year is 2562. If we calculate it in this way, subtracting our current year, the present year of 2019, from the future year of 2562, which is quite a bit later, then it should be 543 BCE, or when Confucius was 8 years old. Shakyamuni Buddha, the Enlightened One, entered Nirvana, you could put it that way, a state of ultimate peace and liberation. And before that, the founder of Taoism, the Venerable Laozi, a profoundly influential philosopher, was actually born in the year 571 BCE, a significant historical period. This means there was a notable 20-year difference in age between him and Confucius, a considerable span of time that could have influenced their respective philosophical developments and historical contexts. As I just mentioned, when Confucius left this world, it was 479 BCE. Then, approximately 10 years later, a pivotal figure emerged, Socrates, who appeared in the world around 10 years after Confucius had passed away. This profound and influential classical philosopher hailed from the ancient city-state of Athens, Greece, and his arrival marked a significant moment in intellectual history. And 50 years after Confucius left this world, it is widely said that Plato indeed appeared in this world. So whether it's their deeply held religions or their profound philosophical ideas, and even today, these enduring concepts continue to remarkably flourish and steadfastly remain enduring. This persistent relevance and lasting impact are also something we should carefully reflect upon. Indeed, considering the historical context, it sounds very much like we are discussing the significant spring and autumn period. This particular era was approximately around 500 BCE, or more specifically, the 5th century BCE. During that historical period, there emerged remarkable and influential figures who left an indelible mark on the history of humanity. In various religious and philosophical fields, great and influential individuals emerged into the world. Moreover, their profound ideas have truly lasted until today, more than 2,500 years later, and are still just as brilliant and impactful. They continue to truly thrive in the world, just as they always did before. This is also something that is truly and deeply worth our careful reflection. So back then, Confucius shared with everyone what we now call the Analects. After the spring and autumn and warring states periods, Qin Shi Huang began to effectively rule the entire country of China. Before that significant period, we often refer to the era as the 100 Schools of Thought, a time of great intellectual and philosophical flourishing, with all kinds of different philosophies. Before that, as explicitly mentioned in the ancient book of Han, it was a different era. The 100 Schools of Thought referred to the many different sects at the time. There were as many as 189 sects with official names. That was indeed the era of profound thinkers like Mencius, Zhuangzi, and so on and so forth, because the various states were different from each other. In many contemporary TV dramas nowadays, you will see states like Yan, Qi, Lu, Zhao, and so on and so forth. There were a great many different and distinct states. When it came to the time of Qin Shi Huang, many religions were merged into one, especially during that period. This action is undertaken with the explicit intention of achieving specific, predetermined political objectives, serving particular agendas and strategic aims. Many religious texts. As some of the historical books we have studied before have clearly mentioned the infamous burning of books and burying of scholars at that particular time, some religious and individual scholarly books were all completely burned and utterly destroyed, except for some agricultural and medical texts and a few valuable pieces of useful knowledge, including much important knowledge related to the ancient 6 arts, were all destroyed by fire. Of course, this is what we learned before. It seems our textbooks included this content. But later, I also saw that some scholars and researchers believed that perhaps at that time, it is important to note that not all religious texts were actually burned or destroyed. If that were truly the case, then later, wise and learned people like Sima Qian and others should have described it in their related historical works, but they did not explicitly mention it at that time. Moreover, those very wise people back then, despite their extensive knowledge, especially the books of great value, many of them were very hidden away. At that time, they were carefully hidden inside the walls and deep underground chambers. During the tumultuous Cultural Revolution, I was actually quite a dedicated book hoarder myself during that period. Back then, I meticulously hid numerous books for a very extended period of time. This particular situation was quite similar to what happened in some previous historical eras. Then, later on, during the influential and significant reign of Emperor Wu of the Han Dynasty, his thinking underwent a notable transformation and was quite different from his previous approach. He began to show a profound and increasing respect for religion, but among all the diverse and numerous different religions that had existed throughout the past, only Confucianism was preserved. The others were not promoted, because Emperor Wu of Han himself was very interested in Confucianism. After the ruler at that time promoted it in this way, it continued for more than 2,000 years. Throughout this entire process, even though history went through many changes and encountered all sorts of ups and downs, up until just before the recent and significant Cultural Revolution, basically the profound influence of Confucian thought was never truly destroyed or eradicated. But after the tumultuous period of the Cultural Revolution, for a significant span of about 20 years, it truly was, whether it was the politically charged, so-called criticize Lin, criticize Confucius campaign, or some of the pervasive and often decadent ideas prevalent at the time, as well as many vibrant new cultural movements that emerged, and some profound new revolutionary concepts. Under such advocacy at that time, Confucian and Mencian thought, including some other religions, suffered great damage. Later on, probably in the 1980s, it began to be carefully and extensively restored once again, a truly significant undertaking. So up to today still, in actual fact, whether it is the profound Confucian culture or indeed the philosophical thought of Confucius himself, it should be clearly stated that it has indeed lasted for a very extended period of time. It has a history of more than 2,000 years. So what exactly is the current situation like right now in China and even around the entire world? In some other countries in different parts of the world, it might even be promoted even more successfully than it would be in China, perhaps even globally, including historically significant countries such as South Korea and Japan. It was around the 4th or 5th century AD that comprehensive and detailed historical records began to consistently appear within their respective national histories, saying that the Analects in these Confucian cultures were widely spread to their respective countries. After that, their people have consistently and profoundly embraced Confucian culture, especially many of the significant teachings found within the Analects, such as wisdom about how to conduct oneself, how to handle affairs, and life principles have been applied in everyday life. In today's world, where science is extremely advanced, including their economic development and the substantial overall growth of their gross domestic product, GDP, on a truly global scale, not only their economic prowess and influence, but also their spiritual wealth is truly abundant, and their material wealth also consistently keeps up with the changing times. Compared to many other countries around the entire world, they can also be truly said to be among the absolute top. From this, we can also clearly see that whether it's Confucian thought or ancient culture, they hold certain value for us, and their profound influence on various aspects of our daily lives is also very much truly worth our careful attention today, and worth exploring and reflecting on. Okay, I thought that perhaps no one would really listen to the Analects, but it genuinely turns out that most people still attentively listen to it, just as they do to the Buddhist teachings. Not bad. In fact, I think that studying the Analects is quite interesting. If you finish studying the Analects, perhaps many people's conduct and spiritual practice will have made some significant and tangible progress. Hopefully, there will be some benefit. The primary purpose of our comprehensive discussion is also to, through study and careful consideration, enhance our own wisdom, strengthen our confidence, and truly increase our love for all of our humanity and for all sentient beings. This is also a very important and crucial aspect to consider. When we talk about some of its historical background and the context surrounding it, the situation is roughly like this. Next, when we talk about the Analects, in fact, the Analects has been interpreted in various ways by many scholars, including some masters of Chinese studies. There are different methods of interpretation. Of course, the interpretations that we offer here cannot be classified as you being right and me being wrong. This is because each individual's unique approach to comprehending and interpreting classical texts can, in fact, lead to a wide array of diverse interpretations. One might even assert that it is fundamentally a matter of personal perspective, with a multitude of differing viewpoints and understandings contributing to the overall perception of the subject matter. After all, these are ideas that have existed for over 2,000 years. When it comes to such thoughts that have lasted more than 2,000 years, in fact, when we analyze them with our wisdom today, we should be able to gain different insights. We ought to have various and diverse takeaways. Take Chinese, for example. It has such a long and rich history spanning many centuries. Yet even today, we can still readily read and fully understand it. That's quite truly remarkable, isn't it? Many ancient scripts and diverse languages found throughout the world actually can date back hundreds or even thousands of years into the distant past. However, as for those historical scripts and languages, it is a notable fact that very few can still be fully understood today. For example, our Tibetan language and literature actually has a very long history of more than 1,300 years. However, before that particular time period, the entire structural framework of the Tibetan language had basically not yet been properly formed. As for Tibetan, its main origin is Sanskrit from India. Then, when it reached the region of Tibet, there were various modifications and additions or even omissions made. Eventually, it developed into what we commonly have and recognize today. It's the same with English. Much of the English language from 600 or even 700 years ago is not particularly easy to fully understand or comprehend today. Last year in Jerusalem, I had the distinct opportunity to meet a professor of Islamic studies. He stated that in their particular region, which includes languages such as Hebrew, they have only been in existence for approximately 2,000 years. Many of the earlier scripts are very difficult to understand. So, when it comes to ancient texts that have existed for such an incredibly long period of time, it's entirely natural that when we interpret them with our modern thinking and contemporary perspectives, there will be different explanations, and that's to be expected. Moreover, we, the later generations, also interpret things based on our own thoughts and understanding. We all have our own interpretations. For example, if I am a Buddhist, when I read the Analects, I might reflect on it in light of many Buddhist principles. If I were a scientist, I would interpret it from the perspective of modern science. If I belonged to another school of thought, including if I were a Christian or if I were another kind of thinker and so on, then perhaps I would interpret it based on my own field, using my own wisdom to analyze it. At that point, it's truly inevitable that we as human beings with our unique perspectives would naturally have different ways of interpreting various things. However, I firmly believe that many of these diverse interpretations, when considered thoughtfully, are, in a certain profound and meaningful sense, entirely reasonable. This is largely because the profound wisdom of the ancients can be said to have a truly very profound and significant meaning. This kind of deep meaning can be interpreted in this way or in that way, and can also be used to explain very profound principles, as well as simple and easy to understand truths. So, in the process of studying and discussing, we can gain a deeper understanding. We ourselves often firmly believe that right is right and wrong is wrong. But some of the knowledge we consider correct today may 10 or 20 years from now, when you analyze your own scholarship again, perhaps you'll feel, oh, when I was young, my judgment at that time, the conclusions I ultimately reached back then, actually contained many immature and undeveloped ideas, let alone other people's thoughts and their perspectives, even actually our very own thinking. Because there's different cultures, and as our personal experience continues to mature and steadily accumulate over time, there may indeed be certain things we deny or stubbornly refuse to fully acknowledge. Indeed, speaking quite candidly for myself, when I first started out, some of my initial thoughts in Larunga were quite different from my current understanding. They weren't really major, groundbreaking ideas, but they were thoughts formed by my discerning and discriminating mind. Later, when I went to various places and learned different schools of thought, I realized, oh, the ideas I had when I first came to Larunga are actually somewhat different from what I think now. So I believe that for each of us, whether you are a scholar or a researcher, the profound wisdom you gain from exploring many different research fields may, at a certain crucial point in time, lead you to realize that your own knowledge is not necessarily consistent throughout your life. So, when it comes to the profound and influential Analects, it is actually the fundamental and core thought of the great philosopher Confucius. Of course, some people say that these are not Confucius's ideas, because many of the words that are written below are directly from his devoted and loyal disciples.
It can be said that these are collections of essays by his disciples, or in other words, written in his language. There is also this view, but regardless of which it indeed is the case, it should be considered the thought of Confucius. From the broad perspective of human history, this particular knowledge is actually very profoundly meaningful. It may not necessarily be the exact words spoken by Confucius himself at that specific time. However, in the revered Analects of Confucius from that period, some parts are dialogues between Confucius and his disciples. Now, some scholars divide them as his top disciples and those below the first tier. There are also such classifications, but if we divide them this way, we don't know how Confucius' disciples would feel about it. Would they be comfortable with it? I'm not really sure. But in any case, some of the dialogues between Confucius and his disciples, as well as the dialogues among the disciples themselves. So what did all these eventually become? They became detailed records of some of their important discussions or lively debates. In the very end, all of these important teachings were compiled into such a significant book. This collection is widely known as the Analects. Actually, it's not just Confucian thought that's like this. The precisely same goes for Buddhism as well, indeed. In fact, Buddhism is also based on the dialogues that the Buddha had back then with his disciples, as well as the dialogues among the Buddha's disciples. For example, between Maudgalyayana and Shariputra, Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, Manjushri Bodhisattva, and so on, there were also some dialogues among these disciples. So these dialogues were later compiled by the venerable arhats who had attained the profound dharani of non-forgetting, and were collected into written form through 3 gatherings. After these 3 important gatherings and events, now, for example, in Tibetan Buddhism, there are 108 volumes, which is an especially really large number. So what did this become so then? It became what we call the Buddhist scriptures. Within the Buddhist scriptures, as we all know, some are spoken directly by the Buddha himself, and some are spoken by disciples with the Buddha's blessing. Some of the Buddha's own words were later formed by the disciples through their dialogues. Of course, I feel that whether it's the Analects or the Christian Bible, in fact, also contains some of Jesus' words from that time, which were later passed down by his disciples and then turned into different versions of the New Testament and Old Testament, resulting in many different versions of the Bible. But no matter what, if we take a much closer and more detailed look, for example, within the ancient text known as the Analects, the profound and insightful dialogues exchanged between Confucius and his devoted disciples are relatively simple. Because he didn't talk about issues concerning future existences, nor did he discuss the most profound topics, including things like those in quantum mechanics, such as the microscopic world. He didn't talk about these. He also didn't talk about the macroscopic or matters concerning the entire universe and things. He only discussed in our present life how to effectively govern a country, how to meticulously manage a household, how to diligently seek harmony in one's own personal life and significant relationships, these fundamental kinds of essential things. As for the teachings of Buddhism, if we truly compare them, there may be some differences. We know that what we've been studying recently, whether it's the Vimalakirti Sutra or the Lotus Sutra that we carefully studied last year and the year before, as well as the extensive Maharatnakuta Sutra, a significant collection of Buddhist scriptures. The content of all these scriptures is indeed quite different, because sometimes the content is extremely broad, and the appearance of various characters throughout is also perhaps much more complex and extremely profound. If we truly observe and genuinely study, then, as for all the Buddhist scriptures, we will find that they are indeed very profound and contain deep wisdom and understanding. If we were to thoroughly research over 100 volumes, and if many people were to fully grasp the profound Buddha's thoughts to the point of complete and absolute mastery, it probably wouldn't be an easy task. It's the same with other religions as well. Although these have made remarkable contributions to the truths of life and contain a very profound and deep philosophy, we acknowledge the significant philosophical insights on life that they offer, and even today, in terms of human behavioral norms and ethical guidelines, they continue to play an immeasurable and truly vital role. In this regard, they are truly excellent. However, if we stand from a very objective and truly impartial standpoint and use our own inherent wisdom to carefully analyze, after studying the profound Confucian classics for a considerable period of time, and also learning about various other diverse religions, then studying some of the intricate Buddhist doctrines, perhaps some practitioners and some researchers who are deeply engaged in their respective fields might find themselves immersed in this extensive exploration. will have different feelings and interpretations. As a devout Buddhist myself, I believe there is no compelling need or reason for me to analyze this particular subject in extensive detail. But I think many of us are people of profound insight, and we should consistently stand from an objective and especially a thoroughly rational standpoint, considering all relevant factors, and then delve into the comprehensive process of academic research. At that point, perhaps we will come to fully realize and understand that many profound and intricate philosophical ideas that have emerged and appeared throughout the expanse of human history still possess and convey different and evolving meanings and interpretations. Um, 裤子. What do you think Confucius was like? He was quite admirable. In the painted portrait, his flowing beard is pretty long. Do you really think that's a good look for him? Doesn't it seem like Vimalakirti and Confucius look a bit alike? These portraits were painted by much later generations of artists, so perhaps he didn't actually look quite like that in real life at all. He lived to be 72, and so did His Holiness Jigme Phuntsok, right? There's a book contains 72 chapters. Actually, I used to criticize this. Indeed, how times change, right? Okay, let's now start this text, Analects of Confucius. Actually, the meaning of the Analects is just like this. It's a collection of conversations between Confucius and his disciples. These discussions were compiled into this book. Today, the Analects has a tremendous influence worldwide. Its impact is profoundly significant and far-reaching. In the Western world, many countries and a considerable number of scholars are especially and keenly interested in it. It is widely said that approximately 300 years ago, around that time, it was also translated into many different languages. Most importantly, if we talk about a direct translation from the original Chinese language, it should have been in the year of 1809 AD. That was indeed the very first time this important text was meticulously translated into the English language. There was a British person who was also a dedicated Christian missionary. They truly wanted to understand the rich and diverse Eastern culture. With this intention, they translated it into English. Up to this very moment, just in the English language alone, there are widely said to be more than 20 distinctly different versions available. And in other languages, in the languages of countries all over the entire world, there are also more than 20 distinct versions available. So nowadays, globally, many people are especially and genuinely interested in this particular topic, in the philosophical thought of Eastern culture from over 2,000 years ago. His way of thinking is actually quite interesting and highly relevant for our current era. Of course, when they translated it into English, some parts might have been translated quite literally, especially in the earliest versions, which were direct translations. There were also some that were more interpretive translations, because some of the ideas in the Analects are presented in a fragmented segment-by-segment style. For many people living in the Western world, this is quite difficult to accept. Because many Western scholars have extensively studied this, require a very strong sense of logical reasoning and understanding. When ideas are linked together in a tightly connected chain of reasoning, they find it much easier to accept. So later on, some scholars in their extensive studies some of whom were Western scholars, and some of these individuals were indeed highly esteemed Chinese scholars. And in the process of their translation work, it is quite plausible that they might have removed some of the older, more traditional ideas and concepts, and added in some concepts that are more relevant to people today. Certain expressions. This particular kind of translation, for example, is quite common. Perhaps for the mindset of people nowadays, it might be easier to accept. But as a translator, from the perspective of scholarly rigor, I don't particularly approve of this approach, because when there are far too many additions and omissions, it can compromise the original intent and precision of the source material. Sometimes we don't even want to use it. This includes some previous translations into Chinese, where certain wise individuals translated them into Chinese, and I originally thought it would be troublesome to retranslate it myself. So I would just use that particular version, but when I looked at it, I found that they had removed certain words they didn't like and had also added many new words they preferred. When there are a lot of such significant additions and omissions, then when we try to explain it, whether it's the original author or the Buddhist scriptures, there will inevitably be some discrepancies in their ideas. So later on, of course, some works are adaptations or compilations, and in those specific cases, the compiler might indeed have the right to add some additional content or material. If some additional content is indeed added, that would certainly be acceptable as well. However, if it is a direct and literal translation, perhaps many of you who are present here today, I can clearly see that some of you are studying the Tibetan language and some are learning different languages. Even when we have discussion after class every day, we use different languages to explain the text. Actually, this is a very good thing. But when we speak, we might use words that are easier for the other person to understand, and it's perfectly fine to add some words that make things easier to grasp. Speaking and writing are quite different, but when it comes to the act of writing, we strongly suggest that no matter what, regardless of whether people today accept it or not, the original author's ideas should be preserved. If you, as a translator, need to add some additional words, and it's best to put them in parentheses. This way it might be more reasonable and understandable. Otherwise, I've also seen some translators in the past, for example, who have done things differently, who, when translating, would cut out the parts they didn't understand. And then in those places, they would also add in other additional content of their very own. But this particular kind of content actually does not mean the exact same thing. This specific kind of translation approach shows a rather irresponsible attitude, suggesting a lack of thoroughness or proper consideration. Of course, there are also various compilations of the Analects that have been produced over time, including some notable ones from the more recent Republican era, such as the esteemed Gu Hongming and the renowned Lin Yutang. Whether it was their research on the Analects or the direct transmission of Eastern thought to the West, they still played a very significant role. Perhaps after that, up to today, there aren't that many scholars who are truly wise and possess such profound depth of knowledge like them emerging. Such cases are relatively rare, especially someone like Gu Hongming, who, at that particular time, many of you are probably quite familiar with him. At that specific time, he himself grew up in the Western world, specifically in Germany, and was deeply influenced by its culture. I've previously read some introductions about him before. Logically speaking, based on what I have previously gathered and understood, he was completely and utterly influenced by Western culture. As for this kind of traditional Eastern thought, it would have been possible for him not to show a trace of it. He grew up in Germany from a very young age, spending his formative years there, but perhaps because of the influence of his father or the guidance of his teachers, for that reason, he had deeply rooted and profound insights into the intricate nuances of Confucian thought. It's said that while abroad he already had 13 doctoral degrees. He was truly proficient in 9 different languages. By today's modern standards, that's absolutely incredible. Nowadays, some people among us, when they are fluent in 3 or 4 languages, even the way they walk changes. They really feel that in this vast world, they are truly outstanding and exceptionally talented individuals. But what was Gu Hongming actually like? Although he mastered various complex languages in the Western world, such as German and English, demonstrating an impressive linguistic aptitude, and it seems his mother was from another country, suggesting a diverse cultural background. So he was also very proficient in Portuguese or some other language, but his way of thinking, he always kept his hair long, like people from ancient times, and his behavior was the same way. And as for his mindset, he consistently maintained a deep respect and never truly abandoned the rich tapestry of traditional culture. Wasn't there a well-known saying from the past that perfectly encapsulated this very sentiment? After he studied abroad, he returned to China, and after being back for a while, at that time, many Western scientists and some scholars would often frequently come to the mainland for academic and cultural exchanges. There was a Western scientist, a distinguished and rather arrogant scholar, who spoke to Gu Hongming with a particularly dismissive, condescending, and overtly disrespectful attitude, saying, "Don't you people value Confucius a lot? What's the point of Confucius's teachings on ritual? Your country's Confucian ritual studies, what's so great about them anyway?" He brought up this particular question while they were eating, posing it directly to him at the table during their shared meal. At that time, Gu Hongming replied to him, "Now that Western science is flourishing and expanding rapidly, our attitude towards scientific scholarship, or rather our current competitive mindset, has become a significant and influential factor. We also admire it very much. But just now, when we were eating our delicious meal, didn't you specifically and quite clearly let me sit at the very head of the table, right? That is precisely the thought of Confucius. If we followed Western thinking, we would immediately start competing for this seat, and perhaps we wouldn't even be able to properly enjoy our meal today." Although this is a very simple example, something that anyone might say when they are having meal. But behind these very words, in actual fact, if we as people have already completely abandoned our traditional culture or rituals or anything like that, and instead choose to solely focus on personal self-transformation or the continuous pursuit of the self with this particular kind of intensely individualistic mindset, then perhaps even just the simple act of having a meal together, sharing that experience with others, becomes a challenge. Consequently, there are also various translations and compilations of the Analects, and as for the renowned Lin Yutang, he also contributed significantly. I think he originally wrote in English, and then it was translated into Chinese. There is a book called The Wisdom of Confucius. I actually bought a copy at an airport once. In fact, this book also talks about a lot of traditional Chinese cultural knowledge. As for this knowledge of Chinese classics, it truly offers a deep understanding and valuable insights. Even in today's scientific era, in what we can now call an age where people place great importance on science and technology, in such an era, the cultural roots are still very important. Why is that? Because nowadays, many people only value technology, only value certain kinds of knowledge. But what kind of roots are this knowledge and technology grounded in? They are rooted in the wisdom of life. If we lack the philosophy of life, then even if we possess a lot of scientific and technological knowledge, it's entirely possible that living in this complex world, whether it's dealing with various people and challenging situations or managing our own afflictions, we will encounter a great many difficulties in these areas. Therefore, in our Analects, there actually exists, from more than 2,500 years ago, a truly ancient kind of secret for effectively and skillfully managing one's emotions, in today's terms, you could say. In Buddhist language, we call it the process of taming our own mind stream. To put it in more modern language, we are essentially learning to control our thoughts and emotions. Each of us has all kinds of negative emotions. So these negative emotions, how do I channel them? How do I manage them well? If I can manage them well, then I can direct these powerful emotions onto a proper and righteous path. Because in fact, life is truly full of many different choices and significant decisions that we must thoughtfully make. Every choice comes with freedom. We make our own choices. But in the process of choosing, perhaps if we make the wrong choice, our lives may eventually and inevitably fall apart. In the end, we might even truly end up at a complete dead end. But if we make good and thoughtful choices in life, then we can navigate these challenges. If we adjust ourselves well, then we can live a very happy and truly fulfilling life. So, in these aspects, perhaps during the entire process of learning and acquiring new knowledge, we will undoubtedly gain many different kinds of valuable rewards and benefits. Now, we are really going to talk about the Analects. Now, you need to pay attention. The first chapter, actually the Analects, This comprehensive work has a total of 20 major chapters. Altogether, within this extensive publication, there are precisely 492 distinct sections. There are also many smaller passages within. First, we have Xue Erpian, the chapter on learning and practicing. Generally, people in Taiwan pronounce it as Bian. We might pronounce it as Pian, like 1 pian of an article or 1 pian of something similar. This Xue Er chapter, is it pronounced Pian or Bian? It should definitely be Pian, as in the written character. However, many people do say Bian. That pronunciation happens quite often. As for the Xue chapter, this chapter mainly starts from the fundamental topic of learning. Sometimes they just pick a random character within to discuss. Sometimes they might use different titles for various reasons. There are indeed many distinct characters present within. First of all, this is something that was in our textbooks before. Many people have studied it. If you ask many people what the Analects talk about, everyone can recite this sentence. But for most of the rest, people aren't particularly clear. First, Confucius said this: "To learn and to diligently practice what you have learned at regular intervals, is this not indeed a pleasure?" This is one part of the content. "When friends come from afar, is it not indeed a truly great joy?" This is the second aspect. "If others do not understand me and I do not resent it, am I not truly a gentleman?" This statement, in essence, encapsulates roughly 3 distinct layers of content that warrant careful consideration. Of course, as I just mentioned, there are indeed many different and nuanced ways to interpret the timeless wisdom found within the Analects. But let's still try to use my own personal perspective on this matter to understand this particular part. What he truly means here is, in essence, after we diligently pursue knowledge over a considerably long period of time, or at the precisely right moment, we should then begin to thoroughly review and consistently practice it. Isn't that a truly very joyful and wonderful thing? Isn't that a truly very, very happy thing indeed? Isn't that a really very delightful thing indeed? Some scholars, when interpreting this, say that this is a traditional way of thinking. Actually, if we study and then review, it's not really a particularly happy thing. In fact, it's quite a painful experience. If we are forced to take exams and review all over again, then it's certainly not a truly happy situation at all. What Confucius said doesn't seem very reasonable. If we look at it from the perspective of ordinary people, from the habits we have in our daily lives maybe, having to review after studying something is indeed quite a painful thing. You could say that. But in fact, the meaning here, from the perspective of ancient sages and virtuous people, or those who diligently pursue noble wisdom and profound understanding, is to study and then review and reflect upon what has been learned. It is truly a very joyful and wonderful thing. Why is that? Because learning is something very meaningful and enriching in life. At the very beginning of any new learning journey, it may indeed be quite hard to make significant progress. But as you consistently keep learning and diligently apply yourself, eventually you'll undoubtedly have a certain satisfying feeling. At that point, by continuously reviewing, if you keep consistently reviewing, after a while you will see results. Learning no longer feels difficult at all. It's just like in Buddhism, where we talk about hearing, contemplating, and practicing. At first, you attentively listen and learn from the teacher, and then you deeply contemplate what you have learned. And after contemplating, you review it again. Eventually, your practice, when it reaches a certain level, it truly becomes addictive. You absolutely won't want to give it up. This includes some of us who are now studying Buddhism. We didn't want to listen, but as we listening, we started to feel something. Later on, we really became addicted and didn't want to let go. Wow, it's really helpful for our lives. I used to be very confused before, but now it's really interesting. No matter what happens, no matter how busy I get, I absolutely won't give it up. There's a particularly good and rewarding feeling about learning. It's a joyful thing. Why is it that some people nowadays, as soon as learning is mentioned, those who originally didn't like to study worldly subjects are now especially diligent? This is something like, if we put it in today's terms, it's similar to what we call top students. They have something in common. And what is that commonality? It's the desire for knowledge. Sometimes I can also tell, here among us, there are some people who especially love to study and contemplate. In every single class, they consistently exhibit a truly remarkable sense of joy. Wow, whether it's the diligent pursuit of knowledge, their boundless enthusiasm for learning and discovery is especially strong and incredibly evident. However, for individuals who are particularly inclined to be lazy and unmotivated, people who really don't like to study, reviewing is quite a very painful and arduous thing to do. We can really put it this way. including Mr. Nan Huaijin. Some of the views in this area I still don't necessarily agree with. He said that many children nowadays don't like it, but there are also many children who truly do enjoy learning and discovering new things. Confucius might not have been talking about today's children either. It can also apply to us adults in many respects. Of course, some scholars regarding the previous passage, because of Confucius's own life, when he was merely 3 years of age, his father had already passed away, unfortunately. Originally, he was from the state of Song, but later on, he moved to the state of Lu. When he was residing in Song, his family was quite well off, but later on, he became a very ordinary person. As he himself stated, "I was humble in my youth." Confucius himself also said, "When I was young, I was a very lowly person." He suffered a lot of discrimination. Later, all the way until he was 15, he studied with some other teachers. At that time, there weren't what we now call middle schools or universities. The way they studied was different. If you wanted to study, some say that this passage mainly refers to Confucius himself and his entire period of seeking knowledge from the age of 1 to his early teens. But speaking of his period of study, he described himself at that time as being extremely joyful and especially fond of acquiring knowledge and learning. Unlike some of us, who find it especially painful when it comes to study, reflection, and practice, he was not like that. Whenever he talked about learning and practicing, he was especially happy and found great joy in it. In this chapter, we talk about 3 kinds of happiness. The first is the great joy that comes from reading and reviewing what you've learned. I think this is the same for us when we study. As long as we keep learning from the very beginning, then later on, nothing will be too difficult. Isn't it also said in the way of the Bodhisattva, no matter how long you practice, you can't make the difficult easy. There is no such thing. If you study and practice for a long time, there is truly nothing that cannot be accomplished. If you read a book 100 times, its meaning will naturally reveal itself. In the world, if you carefully read a book 100 times, its full meaning will become clear. When I first started teaching Words of My Perfect Teacher, I asked them to read it 50 times. Some students said at the beginning it was especially painful, but after reading it about 20 or 30 times, he really started to like it. In the end, he deeply fell in love with the book. It was no longer like it was at the beginning. He actually became very interested in it. So, if you diligently study, in the end, you will truly understand it for yourself. Once you fully grasp its profound meaning, it won't be painful anymore. That's one important aspect. There's also another significant aspect. After learning in this way, reviewing the material is very important. As for me, I think I've mentioned this previously in our institute in the past. Our precious teacher would give a major lecture, and after the lecture, there were some people gathered below, and at that time, Khenpo Gadu and others were present. After the lecture was over, they would start right after class. They would immediately hold a big review session, and after the big review session was finished, we would go to our respective places to have smaller review sessions. And then the next day, we would have another review session. In this way, although it was originally just one class, we would end up listening to about 3 or 4 classes in a row. Eventually, I also became a tutor, and I could teach them as well, but this method of repeated practice became deeply ingrained. Even now, we still do it this way. After I finish teaching, immediately 1 or 2 people here will come up to give a presentation. Then whether you call it blossoming everywhere or flowers blooming all over the place, the reviewing starts right away. In this way, memory retention is actually quite good. Recently, there was a German scholar who did some extensive research on the human brain and its remarkable capacity for memory. He stated that when a person first hears a new piece of knowledge, right at the very beginning, right after learning, if you review or practice it repeatedly, you can remember 100% of it. But after a few hours, he said you can only recall about 80-something%. And after a week or 6 days, basically, you only remember about 25%. So when we learn new knowledge in the future, just as Confucius said, after you finish learning, you should immediately either listen to a tutor or review it yourself. You need to study it right away. If you attend a lecture tonight, you should study it today. If you review it tomorrow and the day after, that knowledge will be stored in your mind. It will be retained. But if you don't do this, if you finish the class today and put it off until tomorrow, but tomorrow you don't have time, and then you wait another 2 or 3 days, you remember it clearly. But after a week or a few days, basically, you have no impression of it anymore. So in this regard, there is actually a truly profound secret to effective learning. After we finish studying, we must review repeatedly. In this way, in the end, you will truly gain a comprehensive understanding. You will gain the real meaning of knowledge from it. This is a truly joyful thing. That's how I interpret it. I don't know how you think of it, but from my point of view, maybe that's acceptable too. As for the second point, isn't it a profound joy to have cherished friends come from afar? If indeed friends journey from a distant place, then it is especially delightful, a most welcome occasion. But nowadays, for some people, this may not necessarily be true, because when some friends come from afar, you have to arrange food and accommodation for them. Some friends are also particularly picky. You do all sorts of things and treat them with great enthusiasm, but they feel it's no big deal. They might think, I'm your friend, of course I should be treated like this. But actually for us, if we have to spend time and accompany them, it's actually a painful thing. So some of Confucius's sayings may not be correct. When friends come, it's not a happy thing. It can actually be a painful experience, you could say. But for ordinary people like us, there is some truth to this perspective as well. Indeed, sometimes, like when we hold certain Dharma assemblies, some people feel especially miserable. Some people come, and then these individuals often experience altitude sickness or other health issues, and they frequently have all sorts of demands. Why is it like this here? There are many habits they are dissatisfied with, and no matter how well you treat them, they're still not genuinely happy. In the end, it just leads to a profound sense of annoyance, a deep dissatisfaction towards samsara. A strong sense of renunciation arises immediately. Bodhicitta hasn't even been generated yet, but the renunciation described in the three principal aspects of the path has already appeared. However, from a worldly perspective, maybe when some friends come, they still experience this kind of suffering with us. But what Confucius is talking about here, the so-called friends, should be like-minded and share the same aspirations. Friends who are truly wise, when such genuinely good friends come into our lives, in fact, for us, it is indeed a joyful and wonderful thing. Because we often say that so-called true friends are indeed virtuous friends and profound spiritual teachers who significantly benefit your mind stream by guiding you towards wisdom and compassion. When such truly virtuous and supportive friends come into your life, on one hand, it is very good for oneself. Why is it good? Because when truly wise and insightful friends like this come, there is so much valuable knowledge I did not previously have that I can certainly gain from them. On the other hand, in my own personal process of learning and growth, the profound wisdom I have acquired, I now have the opportunity to share with them, offering guidance and insights. When two truly wise people, for example, one person goes to study abroad in the West and learns a lot of Western knowledge, while another person is in the East, then when the two of them come together, there is indeed a considerable amount to truly enjoy and appreciate. This particular kind of profound collision of wisdom is extremely meaningful and truly significant. Just as it is wisely said in the Sakya aphorisms, if two truly wise people discuss together, then profound and virtuous wisdom will arise, much like when the turmeric and borax are mixed together. What precisely happens? They produce a marvelous and vibrant color. This signifies that when two individuals possessing great wisdom, one perhaps a sage in science, and the other a profound sage in the realm of religion, when these two distinct individuals come together, something new and innovative occurs, and brilliant sparks of wisdom continuously fly out, illuminating the surroundings with their insightful brilliance. Just like in our world, the turmeric is yellow, a very common spice, and borax is white. When these two distinct components are mixed together, the resulting color is exceptionally bright and remarkably variegated, displaying a stunning array of hues. It becomes dazzling and eye-catching, creating a truly captivating visual spectacle that is beautiful. So, if two people come together, and both are especially remarkable individuals, for example, one places very great importance on traditional culture, and the other is particularly knowledgeable about cutting-edge modern technology, or perhaps one individual is very good at maintaining self-discipline and personal control, and the other excels at benefiting and assisting others, then in this way, they can have a very positive influence on each other. We've talked about this before, haven't we? The Buddha once told Ananda, two individuals can indeed create great merit together. That is one person giving the teaching of Dharma and the other person listening. So even though there are two people, If they truly communicate with each other in terms of profound wisdom, it truly becomes something unprecedented and extremely meaningful. So here we can say, if friends come from afar, we should be especially happy about it and not feel distressed. For us ordinary people, it might be about food, accommodation, or personal troubles, or even some difficulties. Maybe you already don't have good interpersonal relationships. And if a familiar person comes to visit, you might feel even more agitated. But in reality, that's not how it actually is. Indeed, from this perspective, some scholars say, at 30, I stood firm. After Confucius turned 30 years of age, his social interactions with the wider society became progressively better and better. So actually, the Analects, which is a collection of his sayings and ideas, contains a lot of content that is quite humorous. On the surface, it seems like it's just a very simple matter. But in reality, it's not like us, where we feel happy when friends come to visit. What kind of happiness is it? It's because you have a kind of love for people. If you have love, then maybe you can take this opportunity to learn a lot of knowledge yourself. Taking advantage of this opportunity, I can also directly share my wisdom with them. In this way, whether it's in how we really conduct ourselves or in how we in fact do things, we can both genuinely help each other a great deal. So from this particular perspective, as was mentioned earlier, learning and reviewing knowledge is a very joyful thing. And here we say, it's not like what some people say, I don't want to interact with anyone, and it's best if no one comes over. I want to live in my room, and I don't want to see anyone else. Feeling lonely and isolated, not the case. We should always strive to have a very open, inclusive, and welcoming mindset. This kind of thinking, so when we interact with others, this is also a joyful thing. For example, in Mahayana Buddhism, we talk about liberating all sentient beings. When it comes to liberating sentient beings, we start with our own relatives and friends. So, in terms of interacting with others, there is indeed a unique and distinctive way of thinking that influences these interactions. Then, the third crucial aspect here is, if people do not recognize your ability and you do not resent it, are you not a gentleman? This means that whether it is your own personal learning, the wisdom you have gained, or the inherent merit you possess, if other individuals remain unaware of these valuable attributes, some people might feel, I'm so famous, I'm so wise. How come others don't know about me and no one pays attention to me? They feel very pained, very sad, and very angry. But such a person would not get angry. Isn't this the demeanor of a true gentleman? It means that when others don't recognize or evaluate you, no matter how others treat you, not only do you not get angry, but you also accept it with a very optimistic attitude. Isn't this a truly clear sign of great tolerance and wisdom and the magnanimous bearing of a true gentleman? This is indeed a very good thing. Unlike some of us, I've done so much. How come others don't know about it? Why don't others understand my sincere efforts? I'm such a very famous and well-known person indeed. Yet others still don't know me. If you feel so upset about this, it shows that your tolerance is still very limited. Whenever I go to some schools, I also encounter such situations. When some teachers introduce me, they can't even pronounce my name correctly. They introduce me as Gyedar So. Some of them call me Teacher So, which is a bit better. But I actually wasn't upset about it at all. Honestly, I really wasn't upset. That's just precisely how the world is, and I completely understand that the world is like this. Many of them, some just look at the name. Actually, with the different scripts of various ethnic minorities, we also have some difficulties. For example, when reading the names of people from other countries or names from other ethnic minorities, it's also quite challenging. So when they try to read these particular items, it's really quite hard for them to fully understand. At times like this, there's no need for us to get angry either, and we can also just stay happy. Sometimes in the end, I also told them, it might be a little bit difficult for you to pronounce my name, so you can just call me teacher instead. I just told them to call me teacher. That should be much easier. So in today's society, when we sometimes can't find recognition or acknowledgement for ourselves, we do indeed feel somewhat troubled and frustrated in our hearts. But that's also a normal thing. However, Confucius philosophy, Confucius wasn't like that. Maybe it was later on or somewhere else. Didn't we talk about this before? There was a time when Confucius, his disciples couldn't find him. Back then, it wasn't like it is now, where you could just make a phone call and find someone right away. It wasn't like that. It seems that later they found him at the East Gate. When they eventually found him at the East Gate, one of them then said, "Why are you wandering around everywhere like a lost and aimless stray dog?" But not only did Confucius not get upset, he even happily replied, "Yes, yes, that's right." He said, "I really am just like a stray dog." To him, whatever others called him, whether it was stray dog or saying he had no learning, he could still easily accept it. But we might not be like that. If someone calls you a certain name or treats you in a particular way, then it can be quite different, especially during a truly special and significant time. If they do not demonstrate or show you enough respect, or in a particularly special and memorable occasion, if your name is not explicitly mentioned or acknowledged, you feel particularly unhappy. I distinctly remember one specific occasion during a very important meeting. There were two leaders of equal rank. One of the leaders' names, because the other leader had already forgotten, so there were two leaders of equal status. Then one leader's name was mentioned, and they talked about how hard that leader had worked and so on. Then, when the meeting was over, the other leader quickly came over and firmly grabbed him by the clothes and stated, "Why is it that I clearly did precisely the very same exact thing, but you only acknowledged his name and not mine? What do you mean by this, I ask you?" Some people still remember this case. It happened in a certain place, at a meeting in the secular world. So now we can confidently say this. In Confucius's way of thinking, there are indeed many significant and various aspects that reflect and mirror our complex and intricate worldly life, encompassing numerous facets of our everyday existence and the world around us. For example, in our practice of cultivating the mind, if others do not explicitly mention me or offer praise, that is what I desire. Silently and completely without any public recognition, I simply proceed to do what I genuinely need to accomplish. If others don't acknowledge me, that's also a good thing. Turning cultivation into the path, this is a very carefree attitude. Indeed, in spiritual practice, there are such perspectives to consider. But in our current society, many people may not think this way, because many of our values are centered on money and power. Once we are not recognized, we ourselves feel unhappy inside. Others also feel that you don't have much weight or importance. For example, take two people. One person has a salary of 10,000 yuan, while the other has a salary of 5,000 yuan. People tend to think that the one with 5,000 is of lower status. Because he only earns 5,000 yuan, it suggests that he might not have much value. Or say, one person is a so-called bureau chief in today's society, and the other is a deputy section chief. As for the deputy section chief, the bureau chief thinks that he is quite impressive in front of him. So, in today's modern era, a great many things are meticulously measured and quantified in terms of money and power. Many measurements are based on these things. This shows that society should be quite degenerate. In ancient times, it wasn't like this. People placed great importance on their inner morality and inherent inner merit. Whoever possessed such morality and merit, everyone would respect them greatly. So here, we also say if others don't know about it, you shouldn't feel lonely, you shouldn't feel sad, you shouldn't be unhappy. In fact, you should be very happy. You see, in this way, indeed, learning new knowledge is also a truly very joyful and fulfilling thing. When some friends or acquaintances happen to come by and visit, that's also something to be happy about. And then in my work, in my life, even if others don't recognize me, I'm still very happy. I quietly do my own thing, and I find great satisfaction in that. This is a way of going with the flow, and it's also a very joyful and fulfilling experience. Some people consider this particular passage to be precisely what Confucius later referred to as, "At the age of 50, I truly and deeply understood the mandate of heaven." When you reach around 50 years old, you come to understand in your own life that whether it's fleeting fame or immense wealth, or the effusive praise of others, none of these truly matter. You understand what life is truly about, so you tend to take things a little more lightly, you see. It's like some practitioners in our world, things that ordinary people just simply can't really accept. To them, these are extremely simple matters. If others slander you, to them, it's just like being praised or even being complimented. Things that others find especially hard or painful are actually a significant source of great joy for them. So what exactly is being discussed here? The pure joy of learning, the genuine joy of interacting with others, and also, in the course of life, the happiness of transforming adversity into a path of practice. If we put it in modern terms, it should be understood this way. So basically, all of the above. The very beginning of the Analects of Confucius presents three distinct and profound views of happiness and contentment. Nowadays, for many people, what is happiness?
Learning knowledge is extremely joyful. When interacting with others, when some people come over, that's also a particularly happy moment. This morning, I was with a Khenpo while I was having my breakfast at home. He and another Lama came over to my place. I asked, "What are you here for?" They said, "To have some breakfast." I said, "Sure, let's eat tsampa together." He asked, "What are you doing today?" I said, "Today, I'm preparing to start teaching the Analects." He asked, "What does the Analects talk about?" I said, "If friends come to visit, we should gladly welcome them." He said, "Confucius ideas are great, will come often." So I wonder if many of us can approach things this way. So if we study well in the future, maybe there is also spiritual practice within Confucian thought. All right, that's all for today's session.
Bandara